Hello everyone and welcome to the first episode of 2020 of Debatable with your hosts Nina and Kyle. I'm Nina.
I'm Kyle. Today we're going to be talking about New Year's resolutions. So, as you are probably aware, New Year's resolutions are a thing every year. And a lot of the times, debaters have their own resolutions for a particular year. Like this year, I'm gonna break. This year, I'm definitely gonna win. This year, I'm gonna be I'm a better debater. This year, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, etc. So, for this episode, we wanted to contribute to sort of like the formation of some New Year's resolutions. So we're not imposing these resolutions on you.
Of course.
It's just going to be things that we hope people remember more often this year.
Yeah, and things that we'd probably keep for ourselves as well, because I think I'm slightly still active. Kyle wants to be a bit more active this year.
Yeah.
So these are good things that we can all keep in mind.
So the reason why we're saying New Year's resolutions here is because they are our personal New Year's resolutions.
Yep.
So if ever we're going to debate, we wanna take note of these things as well.
Yes. Alright, so we cut this into like 3 parts. The first would be like debate pet peeves that we want everyone to be aware about and we want to prevent ourselves from committing. So the use of terms, and basically just the use of terms for this one. Second is like in debate decorum and in debate like mindsets, like what we do in the round. And like third would be like the attitude that we want for this year.
So for usage of terms, we want to emphasize that misusing some terms does not mean it's the end of the world. Like, not using some terms properly is not a reason for a team to lose. This section is so that people can be put on the same page as to what certain terms mean.
Yeah. So debate jargon is like one of the barriers to entry that some people have pointed out.
Yeah,
and the reality is you don't need to use debate jargon, right?
Yes. We've had a bunch of people asking us questions like, what do these terms mean? We were like, yeah, we should probably make an episode talking about these new terms.
So I wanna be the one to talk about the first word and term because I have a lot of feelings about this one.
Yeah.
So it's the misuse of the word house. So I've heard so many times while I'm judging, like the 4 houses of the round, like the opening house, the closing house. So no, the house is just the entire debate room. One debate room is a house because it's patterned after the British Parliament House of Commons, where everyone meets up to debate each other, and it's one house because they're under this one house and they're all like debating this thing, right? So there are no 4 houses; it's just one house.
Yeah. So it's not like Harry Potter. It's like we're all in the same house. It would be better if instead of government house, we say government bench.
Yes. So in the House of Commons, there are 2 benches, like the government bench and the opposition bench. The government bench are the incumbents, and the opposition are like people from the party that lost the previous election. So they're called the opposition. So if you want to call out a bench, you say that. If you want to call out a particular team, do not call them opening bench or OG bench. Just call them OG team or closing government team, right?
So you can say the closing half of the house. So the opening or closing halves of the house.
There's only one house.
There's only one house.
Yeah. If ever you say houses, you're involving the other debate rooms. That's not a thing. All right. Second term is the word status quo.
Oh, this is one of my pet peeves because pet peeve kasi siya ng coaches ko before. So, status quo is basically like the state of affairs right now. So, what is happening right now? It is a Latin term which means the state in which. So, we're supposed to talk about the present state. The reason why I'm bringing this up is it would be redundant to say in the current status quo or status quo right now or status quo today or even worse, in the current status quo right now today. And all of these things I've heard in different debate rounds. And I was also guilty of some of them before, like because they're just saying status quo over and over again. Like in the status quo, in status quo, in status quo today, in status quo.
Yeah, so you'll be aware of that. We're not shaming people who use it, but you spend a lot of time saying the same words over and over again. So you can just cut down on that, just say status quo once. Or if you don't know how to use status quo properly, just don't use it. That's fine. No one's forcing you.
What's happening right now?
Yes. Okay, the third term, Kyle and I had a little spat about it because we disagreed. And it just shows how complicated this word is. It's this new word every debater's been using. Counterfactual, which people don't properly understand.
And like we don't blame you if you don't really understand counterfactual because I can barely understand it myself. So
counterfactual in its plainest form means what isn't. So what didn't happen but what could have happened. That means in some motions, a counterfactual is just opposite of the facts that we have today. So for example, Kyle is a male. The counterfactual of that would be Kyle being a female, right? It could have happened, but it didn't happen. So when you evaluate counterfactuals, you're evaluating a world that could have been, right? And the misconception here is that counterfactuals just mean alternatives, but it's not always the case because
It has to be an alternative to the status quo.
so if you don't understand, it's not the same as a converse burden, which
So,
is another thing.
A counterfactual, right, is usually the proper usage of that is in regrets motions. So this house regrets X. So essentially what this means is we want to regret a world where X exists or where X happened. So the counterfactual would be a world where X didn't happen.
Okay, so a world without religion, right? This
Yes.
house regrets a world with religion. So status quo is a world with religion. A counterfactual would be a world without religion. This means both teams will have to talk about the counterfactual or the like non-existent world, the hypothetical world that like the debate is about. So government will make arguments about why the counterfactual, aka the world without religion, is such a good thing. But
Yeah.
opposition will also talk about the counterfactual, but in a negative light. They'll talk about why a world without religion would be a bad thing. But
Yeah,
both
so-
teams are talking about the counterfactual.
Yeah, so it's different from what was known as the converse burden because a lot of people think that the counterfactual is just another restatement of the converse burden because the converse burden was equally highfalutin, like no one understands what it means either.
True.
So in my point of view, like the difference between a counterfactual and the converse burden is while a counterfactual could be used to fulfill the converse burden, it's not always the case. Because for me, the converse burden is to talk about the converse of what you're currently saying or what the other team is saying. So, right, a counterfactual is in a world where this did not happen. A converse burden would be, if you're talking about a hypothetical world already, the converse burden would be to respond to the factual. Do you get it? So, if the motion is a policy debate, for example, so it's not a regrets debate, I'm gonna talk about this policy and why this policy is beneficial. The converse burden would be to talk about why in a world without the policy, this would happen, this wouldn't happen, etc. So that, technically speaking, is not a counterfactual because the policy that you're talking about is not a factual.
Again, right? These are all confusing. If you don't get it, just don't use it.
Just
It's
don't
fine.
use it.
That can be a resolution to reduce the fluff in your speeches, to reduce the jargon you don't understand. There's this weird unspoken rule in debate that you have to speak the language. You don't. Debate your own way. If one of your resolutions could be just simplify your
Yeah,
language.
kiss, man, kiss.
Kiss.
Keep it super simple.
Oh, there. Okay, we're kid-friendly here, this podcast.
So
All right.
last is mutually exclusive. If it's mutually exclusive, it cannot occur in the other world, in the other team's version of reality. It would be mutually exclusive if it was exclusive just to your side, and it can't be co-opted by the other team.
Yeah.
If someone says that it is mutually exclusive to both sides, what you're really saying, what that person is really saying is that it's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, so
because
be
it
careful.
can be claimed by both sides.
So be careful how you use mutually exclusive. That's basically it. It's just one way of saying it's only our side that has this. If you want to use just that term,
You can
our
just
side
say-
has this.
You can say this exclusive to our side, and people will go like, yeah.
Yeah, people will understand it the same. So that's our pet peeve terminologies. That's the ones we wanted to clarify, and hopefully you decide for yourselves whether you want to use it or not use it at all. The second would be like things we want to improve on and actually fix this year in terms of our debating.
Yeah, so the first one has to do with burdens. So we want people to take note of their burdens, and we want to take note of our burdens as well. So when we talk about burdens, basically it is what needs to be proven in order to win the debate. Because a lot of people seem to think that a burden is just something that you need to prove. But it has to be more specific than that. It has to be something that needs to be proven in order to win the debate. So the most common usage of this for newbies is the burden of proof. And that happens for government side, that they have the burden of proof to show why this policy leads to this benefit. But that necessarily means that their burden is to prove why these benefits are likely to occur. So in order to win the debate, they have to prove that likelihood.
Yes.
So that's the meaning of burden. What needs to be proven in order to win the debate? So how do you prove those things? How do you fulfill the burden? And this is where you want to talk about standards. So standards, on the other hand, are what need to be proven in order to win a point of contention or to fulfill a burden. So if the motion is this house regrets X, or this house regrets religion, organized religion, for example, the burden is to show why the world with organized religion is worse than the counterfactual, right? But the standard is, how do you show that the world, how do you show that it should be regretted? So how do we evaluate the thing? So ito yung this house would ban. The standard is, when do we ban something? Or this house regrets. The standard would be, when do we regret something? When do we celebrate something? When do we introduce a policy.
And usually standards are subjective. Like they change per round, but you need to have them. There's no universal like checklist of standards to determine whether you win or lose, right?
Yeah. The next one is framing. And we've had a lot of questions about what framing meant. A frame is basically a mode of interpretation. Like, it's how you interpret like the world around you. So the most common example that was given to us was like, there's a photo of a tank, and you're like, what does this photo mean? Oh, there's war. And then there's another photo shown to us about like kids playing, and like, what does this mean? Oh, it means peace. Those two are just parts of the same big picture. So framing is like showing specific parts of the big picture, interpreting it in such a way that will be beneficial to your case.
Frame is just a strategic way to limit the picture into making it seem beneficial to your side or seem disadvantageous to the other.
One of my examples in one of the election episodes that you ran before, I was talking about the image of the Duterte administration. I was saying that like as a whole, it seems to be very strong, but if you look into the specifics, like you have a lot of conflicts there.
Yeah, if you reframe it.
Yeah, so if you want to frame that the government is strong, you look at the big picture, the big machine. It's still working. But if you want to show that there are kinks in the system that, like for example, the opposition can exploit in order to like get control of the government again, you can frame it in such a way that instead of looking at the big machine, you look at the individual parts of the machine that are broken.
Yeah, so that's framing. The third thing that in debates I feel like everyone can improve is middle analysis. Like, my gosh, I hate the term, but it's useful, and it just means like the middle parts of your argument. So if you have a premise and you have a conclusion, you need to have the middle parts, which explain how, why, or what. They usually explain how you get from point A to point C. A lot of people just make that jump. But because we make this world without religion, suddenly everyone will be nicer to each other. But you have to explain why that happens, how that happens, and who exactly initiates that kindness, right?
Yeah, so when people do this, kasi when they argue, it's if A therefore B, if B therefore C. And they just prove that A, B, then C. But like they neglect to explain why if A therefore B, and why if B therefore C. So for example, if the argument is like strategic allocation of resources, and I would say that this policy is not strategic allocation of resources because it leads to more poverty, and I would say the first premise is that if we use funds here, we will lose funds somewhere else. The second premise is that if we use funds somewhere else, people will get poor. Therefore, people will be poor. But like, just we have to explain why people will be poor if those funds are not allocated in this particular way. So the main advice that was given to me when I was younger was that you always have to ask yourself 3 questions. You always have to ask, how will this happen? Why is this likely to happen? And so what if it happens? Yep. So these 3 questions, how, why, so what? And you have to keep asking yourself that again and again. So you go like, why does this happen? And you would say, oh, this happens because people have this mindset. And then why do people have this mindset? Oh, people have this mindset because this context. And then like you have to ask, oh, so how will this happen? Blah, blah, blah. And then at the very end, you have to ask yourself, like, so what if this happens? And this is where you conclude it and say, oh, this is important because blah, blah, blah. Alternatively, you can just explain it in such a way that it becomes a cartoon in your head. Like, if you read it in a book or something, a cartoon would appear in your head about, like, how it happens. Yeah. And this was a piece of advice that was given to me by my friend Edbert, who he got from one of his albums in Ateneo. And then I was like, yeah. And ever since then, I was like, oh, you should explain it in such a way that it, like, you form a cartoon in your head. And then I met Nina, who apparently can't imagine anything.
Hey! Yeah, I can't imagine things at all. So, that advice won't work for me.
Yeah, so I think a better alternative would be to explain it in such a way that even a child would be able to understand how the thing works.
Yeah, that's my advice to every debater I watch.
So middle analysis, just make sure that like even children who go like why, how, why, those kinds of kiddie games, like you think that they're annoying, but they're actually training you to be better debaters.
Wow.
Like think your child relatives.
Yeah. All right. The last part of this section is nuance. Again, this is also another term people misuse a lot. It just means subtle differences. So, for example, nuancing arguments is something we feel like all debaters should work on, and even ourselves, because it's so easy to have default arguments, right? If you've seen this motion before, you know what kind of arguments to run. You can run what we call cookie cutter or canned arguments. For example, like the black market argument
or the strategic allocation of resources argument.
Just the arguments that we've been throwing around at random or things you've probably run before. But to nuance them, you have to make them specific to the motion, which means you need to talk about how it applies to the motion. You have to illustrate how exactly it will take place with this motion. Nuancing just means it's not enough to have an argument. You have to show how this argument works exactly with this motion, exactly with these actors. So my test would be, if I look at my notes or if I isolate that part of my speech, if I can imagine this argument in any other motion, then that means it's not nuanced enough.
Not nuanced enough, yeah.
You need to be able to know what the motion is based on the argument alone. And that's what I think makes for good nuanced arguments.
Yeah. As an aside, like what does it mean when you say a cookie cutter or a canned argument? Essentially, it means like it's a generic argument. Like you can use that exact same same argument in many different debates. And I'm sure that a lot of people will eventually tell you that if you look at enough debate rounds, you will eventually see that there's a common theme running through multiple debate rounds.
Yeah.
And people distill that into this generic argument like strategic allocation of resources, black market, rights are not absolute, etc. And those are what we call canned arguments.
Yeah.
Or cookie cutter.
We've given you some, actually. In episode 2, the one about social movements, we introduced a lot of canned arguments that you can use for other social movements.
So the reason why they're called canned is like if you have canned goods, if you open the can, there, you get your tuna, you get your corned beef. And it's always the same all the time.
But we're telling you, cook them, like innovate.
So nuance would be like getting the potatoes, cutting them, putting them into the corned beef, or like dressing them up. So like it's an episode of MasterChef, and that's the mystery box. They did actually do that.
Canned goods?
Yeah, canned goods. That's the mystery box. So let's talk about the attitudes that we have. Yeah.
2020 is the year where we become good and better debaters all together. I feel like this community, actually, like the Philippine debate community, is transitioning to becoming a lot more friendly, a lot more accommodating, a lot more helpful with each other, which is great. And I feel like we should keep that trend up. Before, when I entered debate, it was a little bit, I don't want to use the word toxic, but it was very competitive. Like it was very like tiring competitive. People would gossip all the time. People would use all means.
People still gossip all the time.
We still gossip, but like in a fun way now. People used to actively antagonize the other. Black propagandas were probably there underground, but now it's just like happy, open. People make kalat. That's another story, but the kalats are usually...
That means that like the kalat is because people interact more in more positive ways.
And they trust each other with the kalat more, which is good.
Yes.
But let's continue that trend. The first attitude we'd want to change or sort of like introduce would be like, don't make faces in rounds. I think that's the simplest way to be a kind of person. I do that as well. I make faces in rounds. I look confused. I actively look disgusted. And I feel like that discourages new debaters. I feel like it scares them. Especially if you see like a veteran making ugly faces at your speech, you'd feel very demoralized.
Or newer debaters and their reactions are just very exaggerated.
Yeah.
Like they go like that. Like, what are you doing? But it is a simple argument. Like, why are you making these reactions?
Yeah.
So faces, I guess if there is a like non-demoralizing reason why you make those faces, I guess it'll be fine.
If you're really like disappointed or actively offended, like an equity violation was committed, like go ahead.
I think it's fine. Yeah,
it's fine. But like if you're just doing that to give yourself an advantage, maybe tone it down. Maybe don't do it. I don't think it really changes anything. I think judges are smart enough to be able to spot flaws
on their own.
If you don't trust them, then I think that's another attitude you should change. You should trust your judges more.
Which leads us to the next one, which is like trust judges more.
Yes.
Because after tournaments I don't go to, like for example NDC 2019, I check out the tabs. If you give feedback to a particular judge, it's not anonymous. Like before it used to be very anonymous, but now like judges can refer back to the feedback even after the tournament because Tabber saves it. So if you're just excessively mean to a judge, everyone will see it. So if you're going to like complain or whatever or make some comments, make sure that those comments are substantial.
Yeah.
And like just
they have to be productive. They have to help the person. Is it really feedback or just your rants? Tabber is not there to help you with your rants. If you want to rant, do it to your instimates, do it with your teammate. Just don't actively try to like make someone quit debating. So I was in charge of equity in NDC 2019 because I was part of AGCOR. And there was so much like going on because people were just making each other cry in a way. Like I've had reports of people like saying mean things to their judges, telling them they should quit, etc. And I feel like that's an attitude you have to let go. You started out really bad.
Yeah.
Right? No one told you to quit, and that's why you're still here. Do not make someone quit just because you had a bad round.
Yeah. So if you want to give feedback to a judge, don't be tactless about it. Do it in a kind of respectful way. I wouldn't say that it necessarily has to be non-confrontational because sometimes confrontation could be productive. I would say that it has to be productive though. If it's not productive, or if it becomes circular, then what's the point, right? If you can't rebut it or you won't let yourself be rebutted. So I still think that there's value, for example, in going up to the judge and sort of asking questions about the decision, but it has to be in a way that
helps you understand
it better or
helps them.
Yeah. But if it's just like you should change it or whatever, or like you were wrong, I don't think that that's productive at the end.
Yeah. Besides, you can't change the decision already, right? So what you can do is help things moving forward, which leads to another attitude we want to change is we feel like everyone should be more willing to ask for help. For example, we do ask personal comments from our judges, but we feel like judges should also make it a habit to ask their debaters how they did. So this was an attitude we started encouraging in NDC. Like we actively made it a policy also that after the round, personal comments should go both ways. So after the round's done, debaters ask the judge how they did. Judges can ask like what they can improve. Judges can also talk to their panel like how they did they like the oral adjudication, etc. And I feel like overall we should be a lot more willing to help each other. I think this podcast is our way of giving back and helping people, and I think that attitude should spread all around. If you want to make your own own sort of like debate materials to help other people, go do that. No one's stopping you. It's gonna be very welcomed. We'll even advertise it in the podcast, right?
Yeah. So I remember kasi that there was a time when judges asking for comments about how they did was frowned upon.
Ooh.
Like there was a stigma against it. Like how can I trust your judgment or your calls if you have to ask for comments from debaters about how you did as a judge? I don't think like we don't expect judges to be infallible. So like it's not their job to pretend to be infallible all the time. I never understood why just because we're a judge it automatically precludes like them from wanting to get better, asking debaters for like how they did, like their feedback.
Yeah, so we have a lot of feelings about judging and judges, so we'll leave that for another episode.
Yeah.
It's just a little preview of our feelings for 2020.
And also when we talk about asking for help, it's not just judges, it's also like debaters. Like debaters can ask their alums or their other institution mates like how would you build these things? How would you make these arguments? And you'd be surprised to know that lots of people just like are willing to help. Like if you're afraid of your alums, for example, and like I was really afraid of my alums.
Same.
Yeah. I ended up realizing that they're really willing to help, no man. So
yeah, they'd want to. And
they really want to.
And you might even build better relationships with your alums if you reach out to them more and ask for help, because they'll feel involved and you'll feel like you got a lot of help.
Yeah, if you want to ask them for team ups, like you shouldn't be afraid to do that as well.
Yes, we are gonna be shameless this year, but in a good and productive way.
Yeah.
All right.
Last na yung let's
Matter
matter load better.
Mm.
So before we talked about making like a schedule, like you matter load these times, whatever. When we talk about matter loading better, we mean like sticking to your schedule, man. Like stick to your schedule. Like trust the process. Like if you don't trust that you're covering everything that you need to cover, siguro expand the coverage, but stick to the schedule anyway. The goal is to make sure that matter loading becomes second nature, because we noticed that a bunch of people just cram matter loading all the time.
Yeah. Don't do that. You won't retain anything.
So I guess that's it.
That's it. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we can still teach you and help you with, but we still have a lot of episodes to go, and hopefully we'll see you there. Bye-bye!